Good evening and welcome to another edition of Isaac George and the Isaac George Show on YinRadioTV. It is the 18th of October and I am broadcasting to you live from England near the city of London. Just moved and, we had a show scheduled in September, but I had to move it. Sorry about that if you were expecting one on September 23rd. But I was in the process of moving and settling from Ireland back into the UK, and I am now living in the magical place of Glastonbury. Yes, Avalon indeed. So thank you once again for tuning in wherever you are. If you're listening to this live in Europe, it's 1 a.m. and more power to you. You're probably sipping some coffee or good black tea so you can stay awake for the hour show. For those of you who are listening to this in the U.S., my constituents and my fans, I appreciate that. You tuning in at 8 o'clock in New York and back there in Chicago and Los Angeles and the West Coast time zone. Welcome to the show tonight. And I'm doing a solo show tonight. It's no guest time. And it's about the mysteries of human love, connection, sexuality, soulmates, twin flames, twin souls, that interesting phenomena, and conscious relationship. So during the next hour, I intend to share with you one of the most important things about my life experience, which is the nature of intimate relationships, the nature of partnering, nature of, marriage and other forms of relationship. And I hope you take away from this show some very interesting tidbits for on your own so that you can become more aware and awake around the power of connection and the mystery in it and what it means. So, here we go. This is the beginning. Human connection, human love, and the mysteries of who we are. This is all about us. All about why we are here, what we are connecting with through each other, how that is part of the life experience, and we need that life experience. And one of the ways that I like to express this or think about it is through poetry, prose, various quotes and various experiences. There are very many spiritual poets like Rumi and Hafiz and others who have written numerous poems and expressions about the nature of love and how it has impacted them, affected their consciousness, affected who they are and how they feel about things. It's really, really amazing the things that you can find in the archives of music, literature, and poems regarding love. So one of the things to think about is that, in a sense, as Rumi said, lovers don't finally meet somewhere. They're in each other all along. And our opportunity is to learn that this love, first of all, exists within ourselves. So it's always there, and then it's reflected by the beloved. One of the things that has been my experience, according to Tom Robbins, the American author, is that love, the functional love, is to make the beloved indispensable. So when we do fall in love, when we have that experience, oftentimes our ego comes in, our wounds come in, the experiences that we've had in childhood, the experiences as a young adult, or disappointments we've had in love as an adult. And we start wondering and questioning, what happens to me? What happens if one day my partner, my beloved, my lover, wakes up and doesn't feel the same way towards me anymore, or they die, or, whatever. There's all these different what ifs. And what is it about us that compels us to want to love and to fall in love or to be in love with someone? I think it starts, a lot of it, with the idea about who we are as human beings. What does it mean to be a human being? And one of the things that has interested me, and has certainly been the interest of research lately, is the importance of the heart as opposed to the brain, the biocomputer and our biology. And in the research, the heart is found to be having a stronger electromagnetic signature than the brain itself. So that can be measured up to 12 feet away from the human body. And the first thing that forms in the human fetus is the heart. Otherwise, nothing else could survive. So that first connection is the beating of the heart in the fetus with the beating of the heart of the mother. And when we are born, we are intimately, energetically, and physically and genetically connected to our mothers, to our families, to our brothers and sisters, and also to the people that we come into intimate sexual contact with over the course of our lifetimes. We are genetically connected to them through the exchange of energy, the exchange of sexual fluids, and so forth. And that is a genetic fact, whether we give birth to a new child, a newborn, or not, whether the mother does. I just received a book that I ordered by the author and psychologist, John Welwood, who asks workshop participants what is it they find the most intriguing or compelling about the act or the experience of falling in love. What makes them feel so wonderful and powerful? And some of the responses he got or has received is a feeling of being part of something larger. There's that spiritual component. We belong to a vast universe, a vast sea of consciousness, but we're all connected. But we're connecting to that larger part of ourselves. A deeper sense of being who you are, a new kind of strength and peace, a new sense of life's magic, the mystery. No longer fearing the unknown, a flowing movement and connectedness with everything, feeling blessed. And one of the ones that I've certainly felt more poignantly in recent times than I ever have before, the sense of coming home. When you feel so comfortable with somebody that you just can't imagine your life without them, and everything is enhanced or becomes better because they're in your life. Now, sometimes that can go sideways, and so what we're going to talk about tonight is not only the compellingness of love and how the human biology and our human psyche and our human emotional needs are met through touch, and connection and affection, but also what happens when we don't have that in our lives. What is the downside? What are the potentials for becoming addicted to somebody or codependent? What are the potentials of, what happens to us when we have our heart broken and we break up with someone or they break up with us? Not easy. And it brings up a lot of old wounds and things about our relationship with our parents sometimes. And if any of us have experienced love in a negative sense, i.e. a tension of an unwanted nature, or we've experienced sexual abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, then those times in which we are called upon to open up to another person can become very frightening and very invasive, and we're not sure if we can do that. And we're not sure if we can ever be naked and vulnerable completely in the presence of another human being. But it is actually a spiritual thing to become that vulnerable, to become that open, to trust again. So we're going to cover tonight the nature of love, romance, falling in love, addiction, breakups. Hopefully we can get us through all this in the brief hour that we have. Relationship alchemy, unevolved relationships versus evolved, or unconscious versus conscious. And relationship as a spiritual path. One of the hot topics going on right now across the internet and in many books and movies and conjecture, if you will, or discussions, is the phenomena that's been going on for maybe the last 40 or 50 years, but more intensely the last 5 to 10 years, of soulmates, twin flames, twin souls. And what are the differences between these categories or these types of relationships, and how are they significantly more powerful, or what is the purpose of them versus what we would call normal everyday falling in love or normal everyday partnering? I'm also going to discuss a little bit about sexuality, which includes Tantra or sacred union, and transcendent states of consciousness or meditative sex that can actually be very healing. In other words, yes, sex can be a healing or an act of healing or a path of healing for some people. And the one estimate I've heard from the psychologist Gabor Mate is that most of the women that he's run across in his therapy practices and his clinics have been sexually abused. Well, that's probably almost 98% of women have experienced some form of abuse or another. And that is amazing and also devastatingly dangerous to the health of our society and our cultures, because it is basically that portion of the human race, that half of the human race, the feminine, that gives birth and brings new life into this world, and is the nurturer, is the carer, is the one who looks after others, and is very creative. So we have to understand that this pattern, whether you want to call it patriarchy or the denial of the feminine, is changing. It is beginning to evolve and change, and men are opening up to their feelings, and women are finding their masculine and yang side, their empowerment. And we're looking for a place in which men and women and masculine and feminine can come into a new equality without one or the other being dominant. So that's another important aspect here. And what about sexuality, and how does that sexual preference play into it, and how does different forms of sexual orientation, such as gay or lesbian, play into this whole thing about soulmates or conscious relationships? It's quite varied, and also it comes into parenting, but that could be a whole other topic, and I'm not going to get into that tonight. So let's begin with romance. Gosh, there's just raft of material around romance, and people saying romance is a delusion, for example, or romance is an addiction, that we're addicted to new relationships. In fact, that's a new buzzword right now, new relationship energy, NRE, and how we can become very, very caught up and jumping from one relationship. We can get that high, we can get that oxytocin high, that endorphin high of being in that first flush of love with somebody, and that can become an addictive pattern. But in its purest sense, what is happening in this dance, I think, is the mirroring through the other person at unconscious levels initially, from the soul level and outwards. We are coming into contact with aspects of ourselves as well as the other person. There was a book that's been out of print for a long time that I found a great deal of information and value in, called Metaphysics of Sex by Dr. Julius Evola. And in there, he gradually, over 2 or 3 chapters of the book, first chapter through third chapter, laid out his proposal that all attraction, the nature of attraction itself, begins at the level of soul. And then that's pure, that's spirit. And then it gradually gets distorted through our projections that come from the subconscious or unconscious mind, and from our ego patterns and our relationship miscues. And those projections that get unleashed onto the other person is what makes most relationships go sour, or end up sort of becoming sort of mundane and boring and uninteresting, because we have lost sight or lost contact with that initial instinct of the soul to soul connection. So any attraction of any type, he postulates, comes from that soul level, and then it's filtered down through the various levels of consciousness until we experience it here in the human realm as falling in love. Now, falling in love is a risk. It's always a risk, and sometimes other people get hurt in the process. Example: you're in a marriage, somebody else is in a marriage, there's an attraction, you don't know what the foundation for that attraction is. There is no foundation for it. It just is. That is the kind of thing I'm talking about in terms of coming from the level of soul or remembrance. And if anyone out in the audience has got an issue around reincarnation, then they're not going to be able to see that in most cases, our connections with people have been there before. We encounter usually those same souls over and over again through many lifetimes, until we work out whatever it is we have to work out for ourselves and them for themselves through that connection. And then we both liberate each other from that any kind of obligations, promises, vows, contracts, whatever you want to call them. If you don't subscribe to the idea of past lives and reincarnation, then think of it this way. If there really is no time at the quantum level, then all lifetimes are existing in this lifetime, and this is the most important one. You have all your past and all your potential futures existing right now in the core of who you are. So anybody you're encountering at one level or another is mirroring to you, mirroring back to you, and mirroring for you those aspects of yourself that have hitherto been unconscious. So there is a potential then for growth and evolution and freeing yourself from patterns that are no longer healthy. So that's one of the benefits of falling in love, besides the feel-good factor. But one of the things we have to keep in mind here, it's not just about feeling good, it's about what our souls want, and that is growth, change, liberation, knowledge, wisdom, experience. That's what we're all in this for, in a sense. And the whole evolution of the human species, in some ways, is dependent. This may be taking romance to an nth degree, is dependent on the relationship or the equalness between the men and women, or the masculine and feminine polarities in us, regardless of our sexual orientation. And that we understand that the purpose of relationship is partly spiritual growth and also partly fun. But fun can be growth too. It is not about slacking off, and it doesn't have to be serious business. We're tackling a very broad subject, and a very deep and important one for all of us within this context. In fact, I think it was the poet Marcel Proust, and it was echoed in the movie Moulin Rouge, is the most important thing in human experience is to love and to be loved in return. And most people will do the most extraordinarily crazy things for love that they wouldn't do for any other reason, right? Extremes being, basically forgetting themselves, not taking care of themselves, looking to the beloved for everything, looking to serve the beloved in every possible way, and ignoring themselves. And that can become codependent. We don't have an equal share in the process. We have put the other person or the beloved up on a pedestal. On the other end of the extremes is jealousy and envy, and sometimes violence done from one to another between lovers. Tragic tales like Romeo and Juliet are a good one. Even though they loved each other, they were forced, as we see it through the eyes of Shakespeare, to make a choice of death over life because of the fact their love was judged, their love was forbidden, and there was this warfare between the two families. So it was tragedy. There's so many stories of tragic love in our history and in our poetry and prose and music. So one of the things that's very hopeful to understand that in this responses that John Wellwood got, what we're seeking is ourselves. And we're seeking that bigger presence, that sense of something bigger than ourselves in conjunction with another. And there is a power, a real power of two being better than one, or more present. And there is an effect that people have who are in love on people who are not in love. I've seen that many times. I've seen it in my own life. That when people see other people in love, it's infectious. It's like happiness becomes infectious. People smile. People go, oh, isn't that beautiful? Isn't that gorgeous? Aren't they cute? All those kind of things. And it's realization that there is the memory of that awoken within their own hearts and their own desires and their own longings. But again, longing can be an addiction. We can get hung up on having to feed that monster sometimes if we're not careful. That's the nature of love, but what is it for? Well, relationships. Relationships can be formed for a lot of reasons. In ancient times, it was, marriages were arranged for a lot of reasons, and love sometimes had nothing to do with it. It was a political and social contract, and a lot of times financial as well. Sometimes love intruded in those unions, and then we have the situation of mistresses and liaisons with lovers, and cheating and all of that goes with it. And then there were other types of arrangements. You had concubines with emperors in China, and you had courtesans in Europe who were women unto themselves, unto their own selves, or part of a network within the social structure in which they were educated and most women weren't. And they were trained in sexual arts to give pleasure, and they were used sometimes as portrayed in the movie, and the name escapes me all of a sudden, but it's about a woman who was a courtesan in real life in Italy, and she helped change the course of history in terms of an alliance between France and Italy to face the invasion of the Turks. So there is all kinds of permutations in this field of love, human sexuality, and there are different kinds of partnerings that happen. So when I talk about unevolved versus evolved relationships, what does that mean? Unevolved relationships, people enter into them because there's that physical or sexual attraction, or is there that emotional need to feel belonging to someone or belonging with someone, and we don't always understand our impulses because they're unconscious. And we're drawn into situations that may not be healthy for us because we're attracted to those things when we are not awake, we're not looking at ourselves and studying ourselves and becoming interested in ourselves to be able to grow. When we don't have that impetus or that understanding, then we are just reacting to things that we don't really understand because we're just, how should we say it, asleep at the wheel. This is pretty much how most people operate in the realm of love, in the realm of attraction, in the realm of relationships. Sometimes they're called, they're accidental relationships, or it seems like accidental, in that two people fall in love and all of a sudden they the woman finds herself pregnant out of wedlock and they get married, because that's what's expected. And they don't know what else to do. This is sort of, we're supposed to do the right thing. So they do that. And it's usually never a very happy contract after a while. It sort of becomes a struggle. Life becomes a struggle. Life becomes a responsibility, an obligation of one thing after another just to survive sometimes. And there are lessons in that. It's not that it's invaluable or not without value. It's just that it's difficult and not always pleasant. We know plenty of stories like that. Maybe you have some of your own. One of the things that's important to recognize is that we all have a choice now. And with all this happened in our society and cultures, a lot of the relationship materials that have come out, the workshops, the books, the John Grays, the Guy Hendricks, all of these amazing people are trying to address the problems that men and women have in relationships, trying to help us become more aware and more conscious. And that's been one of my main areas in helping people through channeled readings and through counseling work and through workshops. And I even taught back in the late 90s in Sedona, Arizona, about the phenomena in nature and difference between soulmates, twin flames, twin souls, and their spiritual significance as well as their human dimension. And there's such a strong interest in this for good reason on a global level. Because if we can resolve through conscious relationship and through conscious relating and respect and through communication and through, various forms of conscious exercise and caring, then we can go a long way to seeing where we are disconnected from nature or from our bodies or from our higher impulses. And we can see where we are damaging our environment through environmental degradation or, economic inequality. And so if we get this right, if we can address relationship between the masculine and feminine as being one of the most important linchpins in how we solve other issues around wounding, emotional wounding, mental wounding, in the economic area, in the social arena, in the political arena, in the ecological arena, we can make big strides as a species to not just saving ourselves, but saving many other species and protecting the environment and protecting the planet. It may not be that important when we start talking about falling in love, but really what we're doing is coming into a greater awareness of our own presence and of the presence of life in all things and learning to respect it again. Relationship that is conscious uses relationship or intends for relationship to be a vehicle in which we become more awake. So even when we are going through a difficult time with a partner or a wife, it is important to keep in mind that that experience was called forward by your soul and by theirs in order to achieve a certain end. It is also important that when you are in that place of conscious love, you are allowing the other person to be who they are, and you are hoping that you are giving that to yourself and that they are honoring you. Because in this dialogue, which is a dialogue of the human heart, and dialogue of our minds, dialogue of our bodies, and the choice to come together in order to effect a greater change in each other and also within the family unit or within our communities, then there can be a real shift on much larger levels. So relationship can be a spiritual path, consciously engaged with, through many different ways. I offer some of those tools in my toolbox of how to communicate, because a lot of the problems between masculine and feminine, male and female, is just we don't know how to talk to each other. We don't know how to listen, is even more important. We don't know how to listen to each other. We have the stereotypes in the way. We have the programming from our childhood in the way of how we should be, what we should expect, what we should be going for. Whether it's the house with the picket fence and the 2 cars in the garage and all that, or wanting to be in relationships but not wanting to be emotionally available, emotionally vulnerable. And so we use relationships, we use people for our own pleasure, our own ends, and that never works out either. That's a bit of a fraud, actually. Interesting, there's a couple of things in the writings of very famous writers and about love and about sexuality, like Anais Nin, who says, when one is pretending, the entire body revolts. And I know that one. You know, when you do something against your own soul, you do something you really don't want to do, but you think you ought to try it, or maybe you should do it because your partner expects it or somebody expects it. Then that's dangerous to your own well-being and your own health, but it also deceives the other person, see? So the conscious relationship versus the unconscious is taking into account, would I want to engage with another person with anything else but the fullest and completest real part of who I am, with my authenticity? And would you want that reflected back to you? Rather than just entering into a situation in which it might be fun for a while, but eventually it would be harmful or hurtful to yourself or to your partner or whoever you're with. So that's the difference between unevolved or evolved, unconscious versus conscious. And so if you have experienced the difference, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you'd like to experience the difference, then there are ways and means to explore that and to come into a new relationship with relationships. Okay, intimate relationships is what I'm talking about here. Some of the things going on at a social, cultural level is, we've seen it in recent years regarding the lesbian, gay, bi, and transvestite community achieving certain rights and certain recognitions politically. That's one big change, and I'm all for it. It's fantastic. The other big change going on also at the same time has been this whole phenomena and fascination, very strong fascination, with the idea of soulmates, twin flames, twin souls, divine complements. I mean, there's all kinds of labels out there. There's also these other aspects of relationship that have existed throughout the history of humanity, but have been sort of underground, just like being homosexual was, not just a religious sin, but it was also sometimes even today a political sin. But now some of these things are changing. But there are different other forms, and polygamy has always been looked upon as being something that's a result of patriarchy, one male having a number of wives. But there's also polyamory, the idea of many loves, So you may have a primary partner and a secondary partner and tertiary partner and so forth and so on, or there may be a closed group of 2 men, 2 women, kind of a community unto themselves, but with sharing. Or, you've heard the term friends with benefits. Well, there's all kinds of experimentation going on, and not always done too well, because sometimes people's own wounds and their own old programming and their old unresolved issues crop up when you start getting into these different forms, because it may look good on paper, but it's hard work. A lot of people aren't prepared for that. They aren't prepared for the emotional turmoil that is uncorked. They are not prepared for the jealousy, the envy, or the sense of not good enough, or being in that place they think they should be in, because isn't that what everybody's doing? That's not a good reason for getting involved in anything. And in this area, it can be very, very dangerous, because it brings more wounding into the situation sometimes than was already there. And then you have to deal with that. So you're not just lifting, one set of weights at one level, you're lifting another set of weights, and you're trying to juggle the two, and sometimes it becomes overwhelming. And it's important to recognize when to say when in those situations. Maybe you need to break. There's also celibacy. Celibacy is also a form of relationship, but it's one of cultivating a relationship with yourself. Putting you first for a while, disengaging from other people and other people's energy, so you have a chance, you have an opportunity to find out who you are really, or as much as you possibly can within a particular time frame. And a lot of people choose that not because they don't like sex, or they don't like partnering, or they don't like intimacy, but because they need to have a clear space in which they can spend time and find out who they are. When I'm talking about conscious relationship or evolved relationship, even in relationship areas of soulmates or twin flames or polyamory, the conscious relationship is the 2 people choose to be so transparent and honest, or at least endeavor to, that there are no surprises and there are no hidden agendas. Sometimes that is very difficult, to be that open and that transparent with somebody, and hopefully they will then experience that from their partner or their beloved. And that is really the cornerstone or the foundation for a conscious relationship. More so than anything else, the magic, the alchemy, the fascination, the attraction. Because when you do that, when you take the time to communicate gently and listen closely, you will find more intimacy in that, and more ground of being than you possibly could in any other way. But in this relationship area of soulmates and twin flames and twin souls, I'd like to briefly tell you a bit about my experience from my research and my own personal experiences, that there is a distinct level or a distinct difference between these particular forms or labels. Soulmates, I feel, are all around us. We're always in contact if we're subscribed to the idea of reincarnation and subscribe to the idea of past lives, that we encounter a lot of the same souls again and again and again until our sort of jobs are done with each other. And in that arena, soulmates can be your mother, your father, siblings, your grade school teacher, the boss you're working for right now, the person you're really attracted to is a checker or a cashier at a grocery store, and you have no idea why you try to go into that person's line or lane, and every time you're doing your grocery shopping, it's just there's something about them that you find very fascinating. Or you see a person on the street and you're immediately attracted to them and you don't know why. But it never goes anywhere. There's never any follow-up. There's never any need to. There's just that recognition. There's just that knowing that there is something there that looks familiar, that feels familiar, that looks friendly. That's kind of a soulmate relationship, all right? And in that, there's karma, or, the idea of cause and effect, or the law of retribution in the old definition. To me, karma is actually not retribution or reward and punishment. It is the patterns that are unconscious in every person that we have carried from lifetime to lifetime. And when we let go of those patterns, when they become evident to us, when they become conscious to us, and then we can gradually let them go, then we are actually invalidating the karma. There's no longer any hook or need to to repeat the lesson or repeat the learning. And so it is with other people. So in our soulmate relationships, they are predominantly karmic. They are people we've traveled with for who knows how long, for many lifetimes. When you get into the arena of perhaps divine complement, maybe there are two soulmates that have chosen to come together and do some sort of work together, like the Curies who developed penicillin vaccine, or other couples. Sometimes they're both male, sometimes they're both female, sometimes they're male and female, doesn't matter. And so this idea of a divine complement is that there's a complementary working and personality and relationship dynamic that is very effective or very pronounced, and other people see the benefit or experience the benefit of these two people being together in some way, shape, or form. Twin flames are a little bit different. Of a higher order, one could say, perhaps a higher expression, but it's still two individual souls who are perhaps part of the same soul family or soul matrix, if you will. I mean, I'm just throwing out terminology here. Hopefully it isn't getting you lost in the shuffle. But this is a compelling thing that seems to be happening more and more and more over the last 5 to 10 years, maybe a little bit longer. And certainly, the first time I encountered this terminology was in the mid-'90s, 1994, 95, 96, when it sort of happened to me, all right? And it caused a huge spiritual awakening, a spiritual emergency for me. And then a person was in and out of my life in about 9 months, and it was all gone. That person was left. And all of a sudden I'm left holding the bag, so to speak, and going through this extraordinary spiritual experience and awakening. But that carried on, whereas the relationship did not. And the twin flame experience can be galvanizing, intense, like nothing you've ever encountered before, and sometimes creates all kinds of havoc in your real life, in your so-called personal relationship arena. If you're already married, if you're already with somebody, it can really upset the apple cart, and there's no way to turn back the clock or make it all be okay again. That never has been happened for anybody I've encountered who's gone through one of these connections. They seem to be predominantly designed to wake up someone from basically an unconscious path or a kind of time in which they've gone to sleep on themselves, to sleep at the switch. But sometimes they are meant to go for longer. And sometimes that person will flit in and out or come back in and out of your life in unexpected ways. And sometimes it's just the memory of them that just makes such an impression on you that your life is never the same again. There seems to be an acceleration of that. Over the last 4 or 5 years, I find this through clients, through what's being written about and talked about on the internet. And one of the other permutations or companion patterns that also shows up is twin souls. Now, the twin soul concept is not new. It goes back to the Greeks and perhaps older, but Plato and Aeschylus, they both talked about it, is that at some point in prehistory or at some point in the distant past, some souls actually subdivided like an amoeba in a laboratory experiment, and one polarity or one expression of that soul moved into a life stream of experience, and the other half went through a different life stream of experience. And at some point, they are always, or in many points through time and space, looking for each other, not really aware of that fact, but they are looking for that reconnection, that reunion, and that drives them through all kinds of relationship experiences with soulmates and divine complements and twin flames and so forth, until there is a coming back into unity. Now, they're in the sort of metaphysical world and metaphysical or spiritual realm of the New Age, or some belief that I first encountered it through the Edgar Cayce readings, that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were essentially the same soul, or even Jesus and his mother Mary were the same soul, split into two different bodies. Whatever the case may be, this is a phenomenon that's been written about throughout the ages. It's not something that's, a new age phenomenon or something that's happened in the last 25 years. It's been quite prevalent in literature, yes, or hinted at in certain movies or other forms of media, but it does seem to have a lot of weight for some people that, that these connections are even more compelling and more difficult to let go of if that person leaves or changes their not their feelings toward you, but one or the other component scares, what they call the runner. This happens in twin flame. It happens with soulmates too, but it happens especially with twin flames and twin souls. The mirroring is so intense, the connection so powerful that you cannot get rid of them. It's not like somebody that you end the relationship with and a year or two later it's like you don't even think about them anymore. Sometimes months later or weeks later you're not even thinking about them anymore. They don't stick to you. But these things stick to you. In fact, people I've known have tried to get energy clearings and do disconnects, and I've done this thing, and it's like, whoa, you can't walk away from it. You can't get rid of them. No matter how much you try or how much you let go, it still doesn't happen, or it still doesn't change. It's not the same as what we call a normal romantic relationship or a normal marriage or a normal partnership. They are different. And there may be all kinds of other, obstacles that crop up that seem to challenge one or the other or both of these people or these paths of the soul, such as both of them living at a distance or having different marital status or significant age differences. They both of them get forced through sort of an ego transformation. That's what usually, when I'm talking about a spiritual emergency or a spiritual emergence through these types of connections, it is, again, about evolution and growth, making the unconscious conscious. But it does it at light speed. It isn't something that happens over one whole lifetime with one person, and it doesn't happen over multiple lifetimes with a number of different people. It happens within the same compressed time frame. And there's things that happen that give it a certain quality or feeling that is definitely different, like being in the bubble, if you will, in which it seems like there is really seriously nobody else in existence that feels like this person. Other people are affected by it in one way, shape, or form, either positively or negatively. There's no gray area. They'll either react to it in a very positive way, respond to it in a very positive way, or react negatively to it in a very negative way. A lot of judgment or fear or and so forth, even downright attacking verbally or in some ways making life difficult for one or the other person or both of them. The sexual connection is extraordinary. It is, should we say, sex without a body, if you will. Most people report these kind of effects even in twin flame and sometimes in other higher soulmate connections. So there are no limitations within physical intimacy because basically the telepathic connection or emotional empathy is so strong, it feels like that person is with you no matter where you are, what you're doing. It doesn't matter. You're just aware of it. So when you realize this experience or you ever have this experience, that's something that you are already familiar with that I'm talking about here. There's a huge burn off of old templates and old relationships. That happens very much for a lot of people. There's a lot of depth of eye contact. There's a lot of different synchronicities and all kinds of things that people will experience in these kind of connections that is quite extraordinary. Be that as it may, not all of them last, and not all of them have a purpose that we understand at the human level. Be that as it may, it's important to recognize that they all have a place within the realm of evolution for us as human beings, our spiritual evolution, our evolution as humans, our evolution as people who are part of a larger family here on the planet. I'd also like to cover in the last few minutes a little bit about sexuality. What is the purpose of sex? Well, besides procreation, that's obvious. It's a way to continue the species. But sexuality, as humans experience it, is in a category that only a few other mammal species also experience, and that is sex for pleasure. And from what I understand from my studies and my investigations, the bonobo chimpanzee is one example, and dolphins are another. And so sex for pleasure is another, not higher or better level than procreative sex, but it's a different way of connecting. It's a different way of communicating. It's a different way of showing affection, connection. The next level would be the level that we would call the more spiritual levels, or more alchemical levels. And this is what the science of Tantra is about. Tantra is pretty ancient, and actually the word Tantra is Sanskrit from India, which goes back to the beginnings of Hindu Tantra or Indian Tantra at about 500 AD. But all cultures, indigenous or otherwise, have a history that is tantric alongside their sort of standard issue relationships and for families' co-creative purposes. But what's important to recognize here is that Tantra is an art, a set of skills and practices in order to bring ourselves into higher states of consciousness, more expanded states of consciousness, more presence. And in that, we can begin to touch upon our own divine natures and the divine nature of our partners. Tantra is something that in different cultures at different times has been used for a variety of different reasons. For the enhancement of meditation practices in Taoism, and for accessing immortal states according to the Taoist principles in China, in ancient China. In India, it was a way to overthrow, or seen as a way to overthrow, the harsh and rigid Indian caste system and the control of the priesthood, the Vedic priesthood, and the Hindu priesthood. It was reconnecting with the sensual aspect of our humanity, and through that, using the sensual or sexual aspect to access divinity or divine states of consciousness, more expanded states of consciousness and realization. So, in some ways, Taoism had a right-hand path and a left-hand path. And the right-hand path was meditation, fasting, chanting, spiritual studies, working with the ego, working with the psyche. The left-hand path was the sexual path that explored consciousness and liberation through the path of the body, through sexual pleasure, through other rituals and different practices that would be considered, quite aberrant or aberrations by the right-hand path. And this happened in a number of different cultures. We didn't have that experience in Judaism so much, or in Christianity, but it's almost in every culture across the planet from ancient times. Even Native American has a tradition called Kudushka, which is basically a form of conscious sexuality, and sexual healing is almost a part of every one of these traditions. In the old matriarchal cultures that existed in the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean in ancient times, there were actual temples in which people were trained in the arts of sexuality for the purposes of healing. This was one of the functions of the matriarchy, if you will, to nurture and help men who were coming back from battles and wars to reintegrate back into their societies by going to these temples of healing and experiencing a reintegration of themselves and a letting go of all the traumas and all the pain and all the horrors of warfare. The sexual healing is the deepest form of connection and physical intimacy we can experience, and it is also one of the highest exalted states that most humans experience on a very brief basis through the experience of orgasm. The French call it la petite mort, the little death. Well, it isn't referring to a physical death. It's referring to a suspension of the conscious mind and the ego for a few moments in which we experience the vastness of who we are and experience deep connections with our lover or our beloved. So sacred union, to me, is the coming together of two people for the purposes of helping each other access these states within themselves, through each other, and also to affect healing of any traumas or dysfunctional patterns within each other. And so that is why the communication is so important. That's why the recognition of the conscious alchemy that two people can have, and how conscious monogamy can actually aid in this. It's not saying that polyamory or multiple partners aren't bad, but there's got to be a lot of consciousness around that, because when we connect with somebody, we connect to them with everything that we are. And they connect with us with everything that they are. So if we're not learning how to merge cleanly and unmerge cleanly, then we carry baggage from each other, emotional baggage, psychic baggage, and it's not helpful. It actually can tend to sometimes muddy the stream, muddy the water until we don't know who we are. And I don't think people are totally versed in that yet. They're getting there. So transcendent states can be achieved through the merging that happens between two souls, two human beings that are actively and consciously exploring their connection through exercises or through just exalted states of love, appreciating and loving the other person so much for who they are, that the transcendence happens automatically, and then you enter into spontaneous states of Tantra. This is something I've only heard a few teachers talk about, is that there's this Tantra that the soul knows that transcends all forms, exercises, disciplines, or religious texts or spiritual teachings, that we have that already within us, and we don't have to learn it from somewhere. We don't have to constantly keep going to workshops to find this. But you have to invite it in. You have to ask for it to be shown to you. You have to ask for this to happen. And sometimes only the certain alchemy that you can have with another person brings it forward. And that's not something you can control or manipulate. So sexuality is a deep part of being human. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with sex for pleasure. There's nothing wrong with sex for spiritual practice or transcendence. There's nothing wrong with sex for procreation. There is nothing wrong with it other than our predictive conditioning from the past and from our parents and from our cultures and our religions, especially the patriarchal religions, have put on it. So if we can release and let go of that programming, then we have a chance different about ourselves and different about our connections of the sexual kind. And they can be very beautiful. They can be very, very beautiful. So all of this feeds into this nature of love, listening, communicating, being present with another, being truthful, honest communication. All of these things add up to the totality of the mystery of human love. If love is really the first principle, that source, itself is made of that, and its desire for companionship, its desire for connection, its desire for reflection, caused it to subdivide itself. As Neil Donald Walsh, the famous author of Conversations God, said, God so loved us that it loved itself into uncounted parts or components, split and exploded into universes, not just one universe, but universes in which we are the participants in a great experiment that love gave birth to. And each one of us carries a fractal part of that equation. And each one of us is seeking that love that we are. And each one of us is seeking love with the big L, home base, headquarters. And each one of us that comes into contact with even a small fraction of that within another is blessed. There is a potential for healing. There's a potential for union. There's a potential for transformation to happen. And that's what I want to see happen for other people, because I've experienced it and I am experiencing it, and I want to make that experience available for other people as well, through the clients I work with, through the people I meet, to celebrate this, because this is what's going to help celebrate the human species for being partly divine and partly an intelligent animal, that we're part of this planet as much as we're part of the stars. And so in that spirit, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen for the past hour, and for participating in your own transformation by learning to work with the things that are blocking you from experiencing deep transformation, deep love, deep connection with other human beings. Because that is how we are going to grow spiritually, when we open up emotionally, when we open up and trust, when we open up and say, this hurt me in the past and I'm willing to transform it, I'm willing to work with it, I'm willing to let go of it, I'm willing to heal it. And will you help me? Can you help me? Can I help you? This is what this connection stuff is about. This is the mystery of love. And the mystery of human connection is that we all possess this. We all are special, unique, fractal parts of this whole thing. So that's where I would like to end it. And I would like to invite you, and if you're interested and feel drawn to, that I offer free 30-minute discovery calls for people who want to learn more, who want to explore more, who want to work in spiritual mentoring and relationship mentoring, which is one of my specialities. So I encourage you to go to www.isaacgeorge.com and go there and investigate who I am on the About page and what I do on the Work With Me pages. And I use astrology as a tool for diagnosing patterns and problems. And then I work with mentoring, deal with the emotional issues, spiritual issues, sexual issues, relationship issues. So that is what I love to do in working with people. That's my love, is to help people find love in themselves and other people and connect. So thank you very much for tuning in tonight, and thank you for listening to Yin Radio TV, and we look forward to future times together. And I really want to thank all the folks at Yin Radio TV for the opportunity to present this to you tonight. Have a good evening, good morning, good day, wherever you are. Bye-bye.